So I want to give you guys some more of my thoughts on this election. Uh, I find human beings extremely fascinating. I think human beings are the most fascinating creatures on the face of the earth. Like, there's nothing on this earth more fascinating than human beings. We can study bacteria, and bacteria is pretty interesting, right? Little microscopic animals. Viruses are very fascinating. They can kill us. Sharks, fish. I find plants extremely interesting, hence why I am an avid gardener. But after all of that, really, human beings still top the list as the most fascinating creatures in the world. And one of the greatest opportunities that one can take to observe human beings is the presidential election. It is probably one of the funniest things to look at, one of the most entertaining things to look at. I love election season. I love it. I love looking at the rallies. I love looking at people arguing about who's the better candidate. I love looking at people argue and listening to people argue over which candidate is the most racist. No, he's a racist. No, he's a racist. And you see this going on both sides, by the way. You have conservatives saying, Biden is a racist. Biden is a racist. He called blacks super predators. He signed this crime bill. He supported the crime bill, which led to the incarceration of black men. And Biden's a racist because, blacks were arrested and put in jail. So must mean he's a racist. And then you have liberals, of course, saying Trump is a racist and he's a Nazi and he's a fascist. So you have both sides calling each other's candidate a racist. Both parties have histories of racism. And so you have two parties, both of which have histories of racism, arguing over which one is the most racist. It's really, really funny. So then you look at why American people vote for a particular candidate. I find this to be really, really interesting. Intellectually, it's a very fun subject to get into, because Americans will vote for one candidate, and then 8 years later, they'll vote for a candidate who is extremely different, right? Or at least appears to be the complete opposite of the person that they voted before. So Americans voted for Obama, who was this, biracial guy, the first biracial president, and he was very progressive, and he was liberal, and he was the community organizer. He was the left-wing inner city vice principal that everybody loved. So Americans voted for that guy, and then 8 years later, they vote for a guy who appears to be the complete opposite, Donald Trump. Billionaire, big businessman, has a history of racism, has made some very questionable remarks about his genetics. He has weird ideas about his genetics being superior. He is a huge troll, right? Trump is the biggest troll to have ever win the presidential office. He trolled his way to the presidency. And he also exasperated tensions between Americans and immigrants and illegal immigrants. And he said, well, Mexico is sending in all the racists and the criminals. So he exasperated that. He exasperated all of the intersocietal tensions in regards to immigration. He's a huge troll. He essentially took a borderline 4chan mentality right into the headlines, right into presidential propaganda. And it was very, very effective. And so it's like, well, how can Americans vote for Obama and then all of a sudden a bunch of people vote for Trump? And people who voted for Obama voted for Trump. Now, not I'm not saying everyone who voted for Obama voted for Trump, but people who voted for Obama, there were people who voted for Obama who voted for Donald Trump. It's like, well, how could you explain that? They vote for some guy who says he wants to vanquish and finally defeat the evil beast of racism once and for all, and then they vote for a guy who says, hey, you know, all these immigrants who are coming in, to hell with all these people. Why are we bringing in all these Africans? We should be bringing in more people from Norway. I mean, and people wonder, like, how can you explain this phenomena? How can you explain this sudden shift? Well, I'll tell you why. I will tell you why. It is very, very simple. Because Americans are they are a people that are very simple to understand. In fact, people in general are very easy to understand. Except for the Japanese. The Japanese, for some reason, are kind of complicated. But even when you break the shell of complexity that they put out as a front, they're also very easy to understand. You know, they want their nationalism and their samurai swords and their anime all at the same time. So, American people, why do they vote for a particular person? It's very simple. Because they like that person. They look at that person and they're like, I like that guy. He seems like a cool guy to hang out with. He's funny. Obama seemed like a cool guy. You know, you can play one-on-one basketball with him. You could have a Big Mac with him. You could have a beer with him. Whatever. He was fun. You know, and plus it was interesting. Like, we could have the first black guy in office. You know, let's try that out. Why not? A lot of people don't vote because of policy. A lot of people don't vote because of some detailed statistics that the candidate spits out during the presidential debate. People normally don't vote for someone for those reasons, right? It's the reason why Romney lost. Now, why did Romney lose, right? Romney, he had that look that Americans like, you know, a white guy, businessman, dressed up with a windbreaker. He looked like the type of guy that you would see at your regular suburb. You would see him playing tennis. You would see him at the country club. That's how Romney looked. He has that appearance. He has that persona about him. And it's not necessarily someone that Americans wouldn't like. Why did Romney lose? I believe Romney lost because he was too rigid. You know, when he debated with Obama, he would spit out too many statistics. He sounded like an economics professor as opposed to someone that Americans could admire. He sounded too detailed, too boring, and he wasn't someone who magnetized inspiration and interest. Obama, on the other hand, he could grab the attention of people. He was funny. He had that smile. He had that swag about him when he walked. He had that swag in his gait when he walked down Air Force One. There was a personality to him that a lot of Americans like. A lot of Americans like that sort of thing. Why do you think, you know, R&B music is so popular? Just look at Obama. He's got the face of an R&B singer, kinda, sorta. It's there. The personality is there. Romney didn't have that. Now, you look at McCain. McCain lost for the same reason. Rigid, boring, didn't have any inspiration. You know, even George Bush, like, how did George Bush get successful? Well, you know, in his second election, 9/11 is what helped him. He had a huge approval rating, especially after he made that speech with all those firemen. But when he was running against Al Gore had this sort of cold, bland, rigid appearance to him. Bush looked like the guy you could have a beer with. You know, he lived in a ranch. You could go to the ranch and, I don't know, do some skeet shooting. You could do some target practice with him. You could have a beer. You could have a steak, put some meat on the barbecue. Bush had that personality that really is fitting to the American society and the American personality. There is a general personality to American society that the general populace really admires and has a lot of favor for. When you look at Obama, you know, he had that. McCain didn't have that. Romney didn't have that. Now you look at Hillary Clinton versus Trump. You know, Hillary Clinton, rigid. She dressed up like Kim Jong-il. She had that maniacal laugh to her. She looked almost like Harley Quinn, but ugly and old. Again, not attractive, not someone that is attractive for the American personality. But Donald Trump, you know, successful, not just successful. Romney was also financially successful. So you can't really attribute Trump's presidential success solely to his business success. I don't think you can do that. I don't think that's an adequate observation because Romney was very wealthy. Romney had a lot of money. He was successful. He was a successful businessman. In fact, the conservatives, they were making the same arguments for Romney that they made for Donald Trump. They said, well, he's a businessman. He would understand the economy. But that didn't help Romney. What really caused Romney's failure was his lack of personality, his rigidness, and his attention to detail. That stuff doesn't help you. Now you look at a guy like Biden. Biden, when he talks, he has this overfixation to detail. Now I'm not condemning him for this because I myself am this way, and if people who've been watching my videos for a while probably have already picked up on this. I am kind of obsessed with detail, and that makes me kind of rigid when I talk. And I'm trying to become more general now because when you speak in generalities, it actually makes it a lot easier to communicate what you want to say to people. Once you start getting into detail, it makes things more difficult. But Biden tries to be attentive when it comes to detail, and he'll try to remember big numbers, and he'll say, well, there's this huge amount of money, and it's $400 million, and it just doesn't come out that well because he's trying to remember a big number. He's trying to remember complex detail. Whereas Trump will just go in front of a camera and say, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, guys. A lot of money. A lot of money. And he speaks in generalities. And when you're doing public speaking, speaking in generalities is actually very, very effective. It's very helpful. For one, people can't remember all the details that you bring out. So it's pointless to bring up so much detail. It's pointless to be excessive in detail. A lot of people have this idea that you can impress people with lots of detail. Some detail is important because you want to give context to what you're talking about. But at the same time, being excessive when it comes to detail isn't actually that beneficial and helpful when you're trying to convey a particular message because people generally aren't going to remember all of this. They're not going to keep track to this. The way to grab people is not by their brains, all right? It's not by their minds. The way to grab people is by their hearts. It's by their emotions. And if you can grab people's emotions, then you got them. Bottom line, it's like when you write a book. You know, you write a book and you have to put a title for it. And one of the most difficult things to do when it comes to writing is to slap a title on your writing. The title has to be evocative. It has to grab your emotions. If the title makes you angry, the publishing house has succeeded. If the title makes you happy or if it inspires you in any way, the title is successful. If the title gives you no emotions, it leaves you in an apathetic state of mind, then the title has not succeeded. The title is a failure. So the same thing goes with anything in life. When you're talking to people, when you're making friends with people, when you are trying to be a good talker in any sort of conversation, you have to grab people's emotions. And humor is one of the best ways to do that. Probably the best way to do that is through humor. It's why one of the most effective influencers, or one of the most effective factors in influencing a society, is humor and music. Comedians and musicians. They are probably the most influential people on earth. And so Trump makes people laugh. He's funny. During the whole 60 Minutes interview that he did, I mean, look at how he talked to that woman. It was funny. You know, the woman was talking to him and he goes, yeah.
You know what you told me a long time ago when I asked why you keep saying fake media?
Yeah.
You said to me,
like a predator, like a guy who's about to whack you. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. And then he says, you didn't discredit me. Or he said something like, I don't have to discredit you. You've already discredited yourself.
Well, believe
I don't have to discredit you.
But that's what you told me.
You've discredited yourself.
It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. When you look at a guy like Biden has no personality. He looks like one of those old 1950s actors who's still alive. You know, one of those actors who was famous in the 50s and 60s and they're still alive and they got that look, like that Charleston Heston look. He's got that face, but he doesn't have any personality. He's just, you know, I'm sure he had a lot of personality when he was younger, but his mental faculties do not allow him to fully convey that personality that he once had. His cognitive abilities are deteriorating tremendously. One of the biggest memes on the internet right now is just showing Biden having brain glitches. He does it all the time. The most famous one probably is when he said, well, all men and women are created equal by you know the thing. And I just look at this guy and I say, there's no way this guy's gonna win. I remember years ago talking to this girl who was very politically active at the time, and she told me that she would never vote for Chris Christie for president, because Chris Christie was running for the presidency, and she said, I would never vote for him. And I said, why? And she said, well, because he's fat. So Americans, by and large, will not vote for someone who's overweight, or really, let's just say obese. Americans aren't going to vote for an obese person. What makes you think that Americans are going to vote for someone who appears to have stage 1 Alzheimer's? Doesn't make any sense. So people try to come up with all these complex models when they predict the possibility of the possible outcome of a presidential election. They say we have to look at the stock market. You know, we have to look at polls. We have to look at potential voters. We have to look at approval ratings. We have to look at polls on particular subjects and policies. And, you know, Trump's a racist, so he's not going to win. And all these things, they can kind of give you some clues, right? And I'm not saying they're completely pointless. Some of them are completely pointless, like saying Trump's a racist and Americans aren't going to vote for him. Well, they voted for him before, so that's completely meaningless. But I think the best way to predict the outcome of an election is to simply look at social media engagement and to simply look at personality. And if the person doesn't have a particular personality that Americans like, that person's not going to win. It's the reason why Obama won and Romney lost. It's the reason why McCain lost. It's the reason why I was able to predict that Obama was going to beat Romney, because I'm like, well, Romney doesn't have a personality. And I remember telling people that, and people didn't believe me. They all thought Obama was going to lose and Romney was going to win because he was the clean-cut white businessman. And it's like, well, no, that doesn't matter. Obama had a personality, Romney didn't. Obama had a personality, McCain didn't. Bush had a personality, Al Gore didn't have a personality. John Kerry didn't have a personality. Hillary Clinton didn't have a personality. Trump has a personality. Biden does not have a personality. Biden looks like he needs to be at the elderly care center. So that's really the bottom line, guys. This is another video of me giving my political observations. I'm pretty sure I'm correct. If it turns out that I'm not correct and Trump loses, then I'm probably going to stay away from making political predictions, at least for a very long time. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this message. Hope you guys have learned something from this video. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.